Hello everyone and welcome. So this is the Vice-Chancellor's Q&A session, so your chance to speak to Rama. We also have in attendance Helen James, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, and Moira Helm, Director of Student Experience as well. And behind me I've got Maddie Young, so your President of Sports and Engagement, and President of Development Beth Elwood as well. So the way that this is kind of going to work is you've submitted some pre-questions. We also have a Twitter hashtag Christchurch Ask, so that is being monitored too. So if you want to ask any questions as this is going through, you can do, and they will come through live, like a nice news reporter. So we'll get it through live and it can go straight to Rama, and then you can hear it from the horse's mouth. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to our Vice-Chancellor of Christchurch University, Rama.
Well, thank you very much, Becky, and good afternoon, everybody. Normally, of course, we'll be doing this either in the Students' Union building or in Augustine House, where we will all be together. But sadly, that's not possible. But I hope, having this session online is still, an important way for us to interact directly with you all and to answer some of the questions. I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes or so, and then take questions in the way Becky, the Union President, has just described. So if we move on to the next slide, please. The first thing I want to kind of say is really we are operating in an unprecedented time. The world hasn't seen a pandemic like this since the Spanish flu between 1918 and 1920, so almost 100 years ago. And for avoidance of doubt, I should say I wasn't here then. I might be old, but I'm not that old. It is an anxious moment for all of us. And clearly, most of us will have seen the Prime Minister's announcement on Saturday evening. So we, are going into a further lockdown, slightly different from the earlier lockdown. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I want to just acknowledge up front that this is, an incredibly challenging time for the whole nation, actually, and globally, and obviously a particularly sort of challenging and anxious time for students. If we move on to the next slide, notwithstanding all of this, I do want to just thank all our students because I think you've been great. The fact, I'm on campus, most days, and I have been since the middle of August, and I talk to a number of you, when I'm wandering around the campus, and your feedback is very much valued, and I'm also grateful for what I see every day in terms of all the efforts you are making to follow the guidance, which is keeping us all safe, the way in which I think you are adhering to the government guidelines, and also supporting each other. But more than that, during the lockdown, those of you who were students last year and continuing into being students this year, many of you were involved in the front line in supporting the NHS and social care, but also many of you have been doing a lot of voluntary work, since the middle of March. So, you're making a huge contribution, and thank you for that. And the other big thank you is really to the Christchurch Students' Union. And Becky and her fellow sabbatical officers, and Ben and the SU team, have worked tremendously hard, I think, in partnership with us. It has been a truly joint effort to get to where we have got to since the 23rd of March. So, I want to thank you, and I want to also reiterate the university's commitment to working in partnership and continuing to work in partnership with the Students' Union. As I said a moment ago, we heard the Prime Minister on Saturday evening. One of the things he said was universities will remain open. There's further guidance to follow from government, and we are, awaiting that guidance. Clearly, we have to study the guidance carefully, but your health and safety and well-being is paramount in all of this. So as a university, we will look at the guidance carefully, liaise and work with the Students' Union. There is a project group which Professor Helen James, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, chairs, called Project 2021, very imaginatively named, which oversees all our activities in relation to managing the COVID environment at the moment. And Helen's group includes Becky. It includes also staff trade unions as well. So moving on to the next slide. Notwithstanding, I think, the new normal we're operating in, it is important, I think, that we as a university remain committed to providing an excellent education and student experience. And I think, many of you who have heard me speak at other events know, that is our fundamental priority within the university. Everything else, to some extent, becomes secondary, other than obviously the overall health and well-being of students and staff to the university. So we have constructed a blended approach, as you all know, with a mix of face-to-face and online. And that blended approach, we moved to on the 23rd of March. But clearly, we have had now time to develop that approach further and, obviously improve what we provide online, and obviously what we provide face-to-face. We obviously strictly follow guidance on social distancing, masks, protections, etc. And certainly, having been around the campus for half an hour this morning, it does feel to me as one of the safest environments, as somebody who otherwise spends time in Canterbury town and in Surbiton in London. Certainly of the three places, I felt most safe wandering around the campus here than the other two places. So we are really committed to ensuring your quality of education is protected in this blended model, but we also recognise that different programs, different courses will have a different balance between online and face-to-face. And clearly, if you are in a performance subject like drama or music, or in a lab-based subject like biosciences or engineering, the face-to-face, the classroom dimension is necessary for you to be able to carry on your studies effectively. So we have tried to have a differential approach where that makes sense. But equally importantly, I think some of our students, many of our students, will have placements as part of their study. And again, we are working very closely with placement providers. And I know there have been some areas where there have been challenges with placements in the first semester, and I'm sorry that that has been the case, but we will continue to work to resolve those challenges. And last but not least, obviously, at least 1,300 of our students are in university accommodation, and we continue to obviously support that. That is probably the area of highest risk in terms of COVID, and I'm grateful to all those involved in student accommodation for the way in which you are, looking after yourselves and looking after each other. Now, clearly, we've got to wait for government guidance today. That will determine how the rest of the semester is managed. We are already heavily blended with a significant amount of teaching online. So I imagine, the balance is already there, but let's wait to see what the government says. And then we will, talk with the Students' Union and talk with students and issue further guidance in the coming days. It also means we need to think about, how we manage semester 2. Some of the lessons learnt from semester 1, particularly around registration and timetabling, we will put into effect in semester 2. So moving on to the next slide, please, Adam. I just want to say a little bit about the wider higher education context. Firstly, I think there is a lot going on which universities have to manage, and it won't be necessarily obvious to the student body, and there's no need that it should be. But Brexit is still with us. The government is still planning to announce a government spending review, budget review this month, sorry. The government is also going to publish a further education white paper, and connected to that, the government may also publish a statement for higher education. So there is a lot going on which affects universities and how universities operate and are run and managed. And our regulator, the regulator who regulates the universities, is called the Office for Students, and they clearly are, obviously interested in ensuring that there is student and consumer protection. We obviously, again, have to meet the requirements of the regulator to as an absolute requirement. So one thing I wanted to tackle, which students have raised with me on my travels on campus, is around the tuition fee, and is it fair that tuition fee should be the same even with this blended learning approach. And the first thing I want to say is that the term tuition fee is actually not the right expression. It is a university fee because it is about the totality of the provision the university provides and the cost of that provision. Only a part of that is to do with tuition. There's a part to do with the library, there's a part to do with maintaining our campuses, the 3 campuses. There's a cost associated with IT and IT support, student support, health and well-being. So it is a totality, it's a university fee. And obviously the campuses have to be run and maintained to provide a secure environment. And indeed, 2 things I'd make is actually the cost of the university since lockdown in many areas have increased because of investment in IT, supporting students with laptops, etc. We have also got to spend additional funding to create a COVID secure environment. And many of you who will have seen all the signposting, the layout of all the teaching rooms, all of these things. There's a significant additional cost involved. So in effect, the average university fee probably is now higher than actually what the tuition fee, £9,250, which comes via the student loan company in many cases is. So I just wanted to touch on that now up front with you. So if we move on to the next slide, please. I want to talk about sort of priorities for investment. And firstly, I wanted to kind of focus on the academic priorities. Many of you will know, Daphne Oram Building, the Daphne Oram Building for Creative Arts is a really important addition, opened in January 2019, and that's to support our creative arts students. And again, having been in there today, there are a number of students continuing to utilize that function very well. The other major area of growth is science, technology, engineering and medicine. And you will know, some of you are probably in the engineering school, that is up and running. The medical school, which is a joint school with the University of Kent, Kent and Medway Medical School, has opened in September. And of course, the building to facilitate all our science, technology and engineering and medicine activity, Building 2, as it's called, has been slightly delayed because of COVID, but will open in January, this coming January. So again, a really, really important £65 million investment for the current student population, but also for future generations. For postgraduate students, and if there are postgraduate students here on this in this meeting, I want to kind of again say postgraduate remains a really important priority. We opened the graduate college in February, just before lockdown, because the graduate college is now providing a meaningful and tangible presence to support all our postgraduate students, master's students and PhD and research students. And obviously, all of our work, teaching and is underpinned by research and enterprise of our academic staff and the research projects and research which students do, both undergraduate and postgraduate students. So all really very important, I think, in going forward. And the international growth, I think, it's hugely enriching to have students from over 80 countries studying in the university. We learn a lot from each other about cultures, about ways of working, and it's I think it's a tremendously enriching experience to have such an international population. And I think the highest number of international students has been recruited this September, despite the fact, of all the challenges to do with COVID, foreign travel, airline travel, etc. So moving on to the second of the investment slides. Well, this is just, I'm sure most of you have now seen this building for real. This is just to give you, a shot of building 2, the STEM building. Moving on to my next slide, which is really to talk about some of the other priorities for the university in terms of supporting students. So one of the things, obviously, is the whole issue around the Black and minority ethnic group attainment gap among students. And again, those students who are from BAME backgrounds, I want to assure you the university is taking this whole issue very seriously. We have appointed Mary McKindy, who many of you will have met, who's our champion for closing the attainment gap. A strategic framework has been developed and agreed jointly with students' union and staff unions, and it is an area of priority and will remain an area of priority until we have actually narrowed the gap in terms of attainment between BAME students and white students. So I think it's really important. It's a moral and professional obligation on the university to support this. A second important priority is employability. I know it is going to be a very challenging environment for current students when they go out for employment in the post-COVID. Well, now we are in the COVID world, but in the post-COVID world, it could be quite challenging. But there will be new opportunities. And one of the things which I think I'm most proud about in what we have achieved in the last year is the fact that the new Higher Education Statistics Agency Graduate Outcomes Report showed us as one of the top 10 performers in terms of graduate employability amongst the top 102 large universities, large multi-faculty universities. To be in the top 10 of the largest 102 universities in the country is, I think, really, really something we can all be proud of. And I think our current students, hopefully, it will give you the confidence that we continue to invest in employability, supporting that. And I say this even at open days when we are recruiting students. Even employability, is a fundamental core to every course, which we teach in this university. Another important priority for the university is sport and other extracurricular activities, music, drama, theatre, or a range of other activities. Now, I just want to focus on sport for one moment, because sport's clearly an area where a number of you have raised questions. So I think it's right that I should tackle sport. So, as Becky and Ben and others know, as a university, we are hugely committed to sport, both for participatory sport, so all of us are physically active and being able to participate, and that we know from research evidence helps not just our physical well-being, but our mental well-being as well, and also to support elite sport where we can, and those students who do go on to achieve things at regional or national level. So that commitment to sport is absolute. In funding terms, until this year on year, we have increased the funding which has gone into Christchurch sport, because that is priority, so we have put in additional funding. But as you will know, since March and the lockdown, the university has lost significant amount of income. So the budget for Christchurch sport for this year is a flat cash, and what I mean by that is they are getting the same cash budget as they had last year, but you will appreciate, that means it probably with inflation buys less than what it would have done last year. So Christchurch Sport is still and investing in sports facilities, not just in the sports centre, but also Studmarsh and Polo Farm all remain, an important part of the package we offer our students. Now, I know there has been some challenges this year at the start of semester one, where Christchurch Sport and the Students' Union have worked hard because the funding has reduced. Just to give you some numbers, the university lost £4 million last year directly relating to COVID. That's last academic year. And we've had to, make ends meet, having lost £4 million. And a significant part of that 4 million is because we rightly, in my view, refunded students for accommodation after the 23rd of March, and that was the right thing to do. We also lost income on short courses in the summer, conferences we run in the summer months, so that all amounted to 4 million. So the budget is really, really tight. So I understand with Maddie and her role in the Students' Union as President Sport, you've been working with Christchurch Sport, and I know there was perhaps a false start at the start of the semester, but there has been an agreement which has been communicated to all students by Maddie that Christchurch Sport will bring some of its budget from semester 2 to semester 1, so that all students who want to participate can do so in semester 1 without additional costs. So that's been communicated by Maddie to all students. It still leaves us with a problem for semester 2, and I know Maddie and colleagues are working closely with Christchurch Sport to try and see what options there are to fill the funding gap for semester 2. And I certainly take a very keen interest in trying to ensure that we do bridge that funding gap. But in the current financial climate, it is challenging. And bearing in mind that the sports centre had to be closed during the lockdown period from 23rd of March, lost quite a lot of income. And obviously, when we go back into lockdown on Thursday this week, recreational sport will have to stop, because that is government's guidance. In the same way all sports clubs will close nationally, the recreational element of the sports centre will close and will only be available for educational purposes, where the use of the centre is part of your programme in sports therapy or sports science or what have you. So I've tried to say a little bit more about sport, because I did see the questions which were sent through to me at lunchtime. I had a number of questions about sport, so I wanted to kind of tackle that head on. Obviously, I will be happy to take more questions during the Q&A session. Now, I've talked on for quite a while, and I'm going to try and speed up a little bit. Obviously, providing a good student record system is another area of priority, because that will help students so much. I've seen good student record systems work in other universities, and they've worked well. And some of the challenges we've had with registration and timetabling hopefully will reduce and hopefully in time disappear with the new student record system. So moving on, I just want to quickly emphasize student voice. And it is important that you express your views and thoughts, not just through the Students' Union, but through representation on school committees, course committees, and also through the various surveys, including the National Student Survey. And this is your university as much as it is, my university or Helen's university or Moira's university. It is all our university, and obviously it's important we to express all our voices for the betterment of all our students and all our staff. So moving on to the next slide, just want to thank again the Students' Union, and the areas where we have worked in partnership. I'm not going to go through this in a great list. I've touched on many of these, but Becky and the team and Ben and the team have been, really working very well with the university and the management, and particularly with Moira and her colleagues in terms of ensuring that we provide the best possible environment for our student body. Moving on, I do want to touch very particularly on health and well-being, because clearly, we are in a new normal environment. It's not the same as, it has traditionally been, and we may be in this new normal for some time to come. I don't want COVID-19 to define everything we do and define, all our activity for this academic year, but being pragmatic and practical, clearly, the university has to ensure that it can provide a good health and well-being support system for all our students. And clearly, Moira Helm, as Director of Student Experience, leads on that. But we did move very quickly on the 23rd of March to online provision of services, including, being able to have virtual drop-ins for students who required that support. And we also have a number of funds to provide financial support. I referred to laptops earlier, but there are, other funding support for hardship and for the Access to Learning Fund via the government, Disabled Students Allowance, a number of areas to support the diversity of the student body which we have. And one of the things we're most proud of is the fact that our student body is so diverse, and the university can cater for a very wide range of students, and that means obviously we've got to have the services in place. And this is why we work very hard, particularly with mental health and well-being being an issue on the mental health framework, which was published in January 2019. And I hope that provides a structure for all of us, staff and students, to be able to work within. And we have increased the resources going into health and well-being, including out of hours support on certain evenings, and obviously a fully staffed team now under Lucy Duncan, and also a new disabilities services manager and team lead. So quite a lot of additional expertise to support our students, and also working very closely with the Kent and Medway Mental Health Partnership, which obviously is the mental health provider for the region, and working very closely with them, and importantly working closely with them and providing a lot of support, both online, offline, during working hours, but also especially out of hours as well. Moving on to the next slide, I want to just say a little bit about, I've already touched on many of these aspects, but part of the work we've been doing is around the Expect Respect campaign, which I want to kind of draw attention to, because this has been a joint Christchurch Student Union University venture to make sure that all of us are treated with respect, and wherever bullying and harassment exists in whatever form, we actually commit to tackling it, rooting it out, and zero tolerance, and it has to be the joint motto for this, for both the Students' Union and for the university. Moving on, as I'm mindful I've now talked for nearly half an hour, I just want to finally, I think, finish with just a reference to the community engagement of our students. I think, what you are collectively doing, and it's very sad for me that I can't actually see all of your faces in a room in the way I would normally do, but what you're all collectively doing for the community, both in Kent and Medway, but also beyond, is really, really fantastic. And in these tough times, I think what you're doing is something which you can be very proud of, we can all be very proud of, and which really lives out the values of the university as a university of the community. So on that note, Becky, I've spoken for half an hour, slightly longer than I had in mind, but thank you very much. And if we move to the last slide, it has got questions on it. You can either have the slide on, or if you want to have me on, I don't know what works. But thank you very much, Becky. And I think you and your colleagues are going to sort of manage the questions, and I will do the answers, hopefully with support from colleagues.
Thank you so much, Rama. I think that the students can hear from you directly. You've answered a lot of questions before I knew to ask them, so thank you for that. So how I wanted to work it is we've split it into certain thematic sections, so we can kind of keep our thinking on one track as we go through. It also helps colleagues, for example, Moira and Helen, who might need to come in as well. So if we start off, so we're thinking about learning here. So one of our students have asked, if placements are curtailed again, how will the university handle this? And I think specifically we're talking about non-education or nursing or healthcare placements, but the other ones, so sports placements, for example, the ones that we've already missed out on.
Yes, placements, I think, it's an important part of the programme, and this is an integral part of the programmes for many programmes, as you said, Becky, not just health and education, but also in other subjects like policing and so on. So for the moment, certainly the government guidance on health placements is they should carry on, and placement providers should carry on providing those placements and to put arrangements in place for the safe provision of placements. So at the moment we are working on the basis, certainly in the health area and most likely in the education, i.e. schools, placements will continue during this lockdown period. For the other subjects where there are placements, we are waiting for further government guidance, and until that guidance comes through, as soon as the guidance comes through, we will obviously have further communications with our student body and through you as well, Becky, through the Students' Union. But if we were having this conversation possibly even tomorrow or certainly on Wednesday, we might be in a slightly better place to be able to talk in a bit more detail about that.
Thank you. So I want to move slightly away from learning in itself, but actually thinking about something that's COVID specific. So obviously we've got a few questions about that. We have one here from a student who asks, will the uni lobby the government to reduce or rebate fees based upon reduced student experience and access to the facilities tuition fees contribute to?
Okay, so I did in my presentation tackle the issue around tuition fees, which is really, as I said, was a university fee. And certainly, the fact that we had a small deficit budget last year, you can see that, the university is not making a surplus or profit at this point in time. If anything, it's costing the university more. So I think it is difficult for the university to make a case for reducing the fees. However, going back to the first part of the question, the government could certainly for undergraduates find a way of writing off part of the loan in recognition of the challenges that this generation of students who are affected by the COVID pandemic will have faced, and also will continue to face potentially when they go into employment. So in recognition of that, it is possible that the government could consider writing off a proportion of the student loan. And if the government were to consider that, we would obviously be very willing to support that. I think what would be difficult for us to support when we already have a budget deficit is to argue for a cut in the loan monies which come to the university, if you see what I mean, Becky.
No, understood. I think what the students want to know is that if there is a way that wouldn't affect you, the university personally, that you would support them in getting back some of what they've paid.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I can make a case to support, any case to government in this area partly because, as I said, it's not just about the challenging environment students have had to face, it's also about the challenging environment they're probably going to face in the next 2 or 3 years economically as they graduate and go out. So I think that does mean, you could make certainly a strong moral argument that the government should actually think about reducing the outstanding loan at the end of the period of graduation for students who are currently affected by this.
Great, thank you. So bringing it back sort of to the institution, students are aware that lecturers have been reduced to 0.8 contracts. How can you justify the university's indefensible approach of then directing students who are concerned about the repugnant decision to keep the university open at this time?
Okay, so just a little bit of background. When we started to plan the budget for this year which we're in, the university would have had a very, very major financial hole, as with most universities, I should say, would have had a big financial hole, and that's largely driven by the impact of COVID last year and carrying on into this year. So we were very open about it. We talked to staff about it, all 1,850 staff we had a consultation with. We talked to the staff unions about it. And what was agreed in a sense was many universities were starting to make staff redundant, to make the savings in order to balance the books this year. And we took the view that actually that is more counterproductive for both students and student experience in terms of making, and we would have had to have considered losing, say, 250 staff out of the 1,850 staff. And that would have had a huge impact on students and student experience, but it would have also had a huge impact on those staff, whoever they might have been, and their families, and particularly at this time when unemployment is rising and there are very few jobs in the job market. So we agreed, discussed, and the unions voted on this and approved an agreement which was really about the highest paid 800 members of staff taking a 20% pay cut for a 20% reduction in the time they work, in return for making sure that nobody becomes unemployed in this very difficult period of time. So there were 7 principles agreed as part with the unions, which are published on the website as part of something called the temporary collective agreement with the unions. And the first of those most important principles is that even though staff time would reduce to 80%, we will prioritize student experience and student education. And so no student should have, that may be blended, it may be different from what a student might have had 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but no student should have, overall a lesser experience than they would have had in any other year. So how do we reduce the staff time by 20%, you ask? Well, by cutting out a number of other things which academic and other staff do. We have reduced the number of meetings which are held in the university in order to save time. We have reduced the amount of other sort of activity, and some of it has meant certain research activities have also had to be paused for 12 months. So that's the way we are protecting this education of students, but also saving the necessary money to avoid job losses at the university this year.
Thank you, Ram. I think that's quite comprehensive, actually. And if students do have any other further questions about that, because it is intricate and it is being under review as well, isn't it, as time goes on? I'm sure they can get in touch as well. So we have another question here that's a bit more relevant to what's going on right now. The question is, what does the university have in place to support students who are unable to return home for Christmas? And the follow-up is, this could include international students, those whose families are shielding, or a lot more students if this new lockdown is extended.
Yeah, so we will follow government guidance, but we won't leave students in the lurch. So if I go back to the 23rd of March, I think we asked students return home either on the 19th or the 20th of March, and students returned home. But believe it or not, and some of you in this meeting may have been those students, we had over 100 students on campus. We made sure they were supported, both in terms of what they were able to get in terms of food and provisions, but also in terms of health and well-being of our students. So whether you are an international student not able to go home because of lockdown, whether you are a student isolating as part of the National Trust Track and Test and Trace activity and can't return home and are quarantining or isolating, or whether there are other reasons, estranged from family or from, you've come to us from care, whatever your circumstances, if you need to remain on campus, you can remain on campus, and we will, as we did in terms of after the 23rd of March, we will carry on supporting those students through the Christmas period and during any other lockdown period.
Thank you, Rama. So moving more toward the support and wellbeing side then, as we've got a lot of questions around that naturally, what extra resources will student wellbeing be given to cope with the increased demands, given that the university has directed anxious, etc. students there, and what role can personal academic tutors play in supporting students?
Okay, no, thank you, and that's a really important question, Becky. And I think, that's why I devoted sort of 2 slides to health and well-being, because I do think health and well-being matters, and also, we now, as a society, have a much better understanding of mental health and well-being and the importance of that as well. So, as I said in my presentation, we have increased the staffing team, which has gone, in the health and well-being department. I have to say, obviously, I think last when I was talking to Moira Helm about this, we were supporting some 3,000 students in different ways, some at very minimal level, some at very substantial level, and particularly students supported through individual learning plans and so on. So we have invested, more. However, I do think, the demand, as you quite rightly say, Becky, is continuing to increase. And the reality, I think, is while we will continue to invest, and this is a very high priority, it is going to be an ongoing challenge to keep up with the demand, and hence the reason why we are working in partnership with Kent and Medway Mental Health Partnership, for example, so that where there are significant professional support needs, they are best done by NHS support rather than just by us. So I hope students do feel that we continue to prioritize this. We will continue to support this. Now, there was a very last bit to that question, which I can't now quite remember. Could you just?
Yeah, it's around personal academic tutors.
Oh yes, personal academic tutors. I think PATs are personal academic tutors are a really important first port of call for students, and a lot of work has been done in actually supporting, training, developing personal academic tutors. So, okay, each individual will have a significant number of tutees, but it is an important first port of call. Particularly, I think, Becky, you used the word sort of as more students get anxious and anxiety and so on. I think we need to distinguish, between mental sort of well-being, including anxiety, and mental health, where somebody has serious health conditions which require more serious professional support. So PATs can, I think, play an important role to support it. I know the Students' Union plays an important role, and collectively, many staff in the institution who are not part of the Health and Wellbeing Office, but are neither part of the student union nor PATS, also provide support. So the chaplaincy provides a huge amount of support. The housekeeping, security, staff and the estates and facilities, they may not be very obvious, but I know, and I think Becky, you know, for many a student, particularly when they first come to the university, it is that one person when they are lonely or out of place or not settled in. It could be a security guard, it could be a housekeeping member of staff who provides that support, all very, on an individualized basis. So the totality of the university, ultimately, we're all committed to wanting to support, the student health and well-being. And obviously, there are always individual cases, which are specialised, which the health and wellbeing team will deal with and pass to the NHS, where they require really very serious professional support.
Thank you, Rama. I think that was something that actually would affect a lot of students. This one is a little bit more specific, so it's around the registration of new students from this year. So students want to know what lessons have been learned, and will this happen again in January for their new students, or even when they come back next September when they're re-registering. And the follow-up for that is what support has been provided for those who have had a horrid start to their university career.
Okay, so I think I did in my presentation say we are working very hard on the lessons learned from registration, but it's probably also worth taking a couple of minutes to explain some of the background. So normally, if you go back to September 2019, we had a face-to-face registration process. So students will have arrived to Augustine House on an appointed day and work through the registration process, supported by members of staff from different teams. And this year, clearly for COVID-19 and social distancing purposes, we had to very quickly move to online registering. So a decision had to be taken in April that we will register students online. The additional complication is I referred to the modernising our student information and putting in a new student record system. That should have been in place for registering students, which would have made it easier to register students online, even though we moved to online very quickly. But unfortunately, because of COVID, staff having to go off and not being able to work on the project meant that we ended up with using the new system to admit students, but the old student record system to register students. So there was an interface had to be created between the new system and the old system, which obviously won't exist next year because all students will be admitted through admissions and registered and enrolled all on the same system, the new system called SITS. And clearly that interface, didn't work very well, which created, I think, and you and I both know because you and I had meetings to discuss the challenges in the month of late in August and early in September. And I apologize. I don't want to beat about the bush. I apologize. We didn't get it right. There were extenuating circumstances in terms of having to move to online quickly, having to, as a result of that, having to have a new IT account authentication system, and the interface between the old and the new didn't work very well. But none of those ultimately take away from the fact that we didn't do as well as we should have done by our students. It caused moments of significant anxiety for at least a number of students. As you know, you were part of this. We set up a gold group, a silver group, and we dealt with the queries and the backlogs. And every student we made sure we got hold of on the telephone to be able to support them through the process. And I am pleased that in terms of new students, we were able to register 3,615 new undergraduate full-time students in the end. Great credit to all the staff, and I do want to thank staff. In a sense, it's not the staff's fault that the systems failed us at one point, and and I think there are lessons, as you say. I mean, one of the things we are doing very seriously is learning the lessons from that. The other area, and I know the questioner didn't touch on this specifically, is around timetabling, and clearly, moving to a socially distanced timetable where the maximum permitted number of students on any one day is 20%, rooms all spaced out at 1.3 meters between students, etc., has reduced our capacity, and that has made it very challenging for timetabling purposes. And clearly, in the first early weeks, we now have a task force chaired by one of the deans to work now so that timetabling arrangements for semester 2. Obviously, this may all change if there's a lockdown into the new year, but and depending on what the government guidance is, but to get timetabling, better done for semester 2, and the task force has been set up under one of the deans to do that. I've taken a little bit of time to explain that because, clearly, it wasn't our finest hour in early September. We've tried to put that right. And, I do want to say sorry to students, all students who had those challenges because of this.
Thank you, Rama. Appreciate that. So moving away from that, I think actually there's a really important question here that asks what much needed plans the university has to ensure that disabled student body, especially those with invisible disabilities, are treated with awareness and support throughout their time at Christchurch, especially in light of the current circumstances.
Yes, no, I think it is important, and I think I'm glad the questioner said both visible and invisible, because not all disabilities are visible. And I mean, you saw the fact we have made an appointment of a senior person as the student disabilities manager, so there's a real focus on this area. But COVID does make particular challenges for particular students. So one immediate challenge, which is this whole issue around, if I'm not wearing a mask in a building, why am I not wearing a mask is an obvious question for everybody else to ask, and providing the sort of sunflower lanyards, which we have now received, which students or staff can wear to indicate that they have a health reason not to wear a mask, is an important one. And obviously, people can, if they can tolerate it, can wear a shield instead of a mask as well. So there are some COVID related things to do with different forms of conditions we are trying to recognize. I also recognize that the online receipt of information and study poses challenges for certain students with certain disabilities. And I think if any of you on this meeting, on this call, are in that category, it is important really to raise that with your personal academic tutor, or to raise it with health and well-being, so your individualized learning plan can be adapted to recognize this. And clearly one issue is, if one has a disability around hearing impairments, for example, it's clear that may make it difficult for somebody receiving lectures online. There are ways in which those lectures are obviously captured, and we can have those lectures when they are played in recap with subtitles to help support that. So there are ways in which we are always thinking about finding ways to support students with disabilities. But, as you say, some are visible, but others are not visible. And particularly if they're not visible, we won't know unless students make themselves known in a confidential basis to mental health, health and well-being department, or to their personal academic tutor. And on a case-by-case basis, then we will try and make sure that student is supported.
Thank you. You've actually just answered my next question, so thank you, Rama. That was around someone struggling with the blended learning approach due to a hearing impairment, but there are ways that they can kind of look around that, so speak to their personal academic tutor. I want to move on a little bit now to sport. Now, I know that you have explained sport a little bit more, you spent some time on it. I think there are a couple of questions that I'd like to still give to you, if that's all right. So from a student who says, as university students pay so much for tuition and are encouraged to do things other than our studies, but the sports facilities at Christchurch are inadequate to facilitate a good experience, is there an opportunity to gain more funding to go towards the use of more facilities that are more accommodating to other teams that are not able to train outside?
The answer is we are always, I think, looking to find external funding and also build partnerships with external bodies. I mean, one, when, as you will, well, you won't remember because you were not here in 2013, but as those, one of the things we did in 2013 was to strike up a partnership with Polo Farm, invest jointly with Polo Farm in the facilities there. That was after we recognized the sports centre was great, when it was built, but was insufficient to meet the needs. We will continue to invest. I mean, obviously it's a challenging financial environment. We clearly, and you've heard me say this before, Becky, I'm sure, Stodmarsh, is not the ideal place for the pitches, we have. So it's clear, if we can find a way of relocating those pitches to a different place, properly funded, AstroTurf all-weather pitches, then I think that would improve our facilities greatly. So we are, wanting to continue to invest, notwithstanding the fact it is a challenging environment. So there are still conversations going on with the local councils, Canterbury City Council, as to what planning use change could happen to Stodmarsh, which would release cash for the university to invest elsewhere. We continue to talk to Polo Farm as to whether there are facilities that we can expand, particularly in terms of putting our own AstroTurf pitches there. I mean, these are all costly investments, but they are important investments because, if you look at the investment we have made in the STEM building and in the Creative Arts building, it is important to invest for the long term. It's important to invest for future current as well as future generation of students and staff. So, there is every prospect. In the short term around funding for semester 2, the conversations I've had with colleagues on the university side, and no doubt they've shared that with Maddie and others, is about are there trusts and places we can bid to, which particularly focus on sport or student sport or young people sport, where we can get some additional supplementary funding from. That, I'm talking about sort of particularly to do with semester 2.
Thank you. That actually leads me really nicely onto my next question. So when many students have experienced particularly hard financial struggles this year due to the pandemic, why did Christchurch Sport propose to add a fee onto club sport instead of exhausting every opportunity which doesn't rely on charging students?
Yes, I mean, part of my presentation I did say, there has been a financial challenge for Christchurch Sport. Their budget was flat cash, or the same cash as they had last term, last academic year, which buys obviously less. I think, as I say, there might have been a false start in the conversations between the Students' Union, particularly Maddie and her team, and Christchurch Sport. But I think what's been agreed now is, I think, really important, which is semester 1, to bring some money forward from semester 2 to semester 1 and ensure that there is no additional charge for students. And I think that is the right decision, which Maddie and Paul Akani and others have come to jointly. I think we have to see sport as a joint endeavour between the Students' Union and the university. And I think the more we can make sure we work in partnership to ensure we provide the maximum we can for our students on the sports side, the better it would be. But yes, it was probably, I think there could have been better engagement and consultation at the very start of the academic year to avoid that moment of crisis before we ended up with a solution. But I do think it's an urgent priority, certainly for me, to make sure that from the university side, our colleagues are working with Maddie and others to make sure we have a solution for semester 2, because what we don't want to do is to find ourselves in January where we were in September. So I think, I'll take a personal interest in my role as Vice-Chancellor in making sure those conversations are taking place. I'm not pretending there's an easy solution, but I do think we need to have those conversations and find a way forward. And part of that may be linking to the previous question, trying to get some external funding.
Thank you. And that's kind of all of the questions I think that we're going to ask today. But I do have a final one for yourself, Moira and Helen, and whether or not and how you would be looking after your well-being, if you've got any tips for everybody else coming into a lockdown. We'll
start perhaps with Moira and Helen, and they may also want to say something. So would Moira, do you want to a brief comment, and Helen?
I'm very happy to come in on that one. I'm a very avid gardener, regardless of the weather. You'll find me in January or February out in the garden, digging and getting ready for spring. So that's what keeps me sane. That's the same.
So Moira, so how do I follow that? So I do like going in the garden, but I'm probably more of a fair weather gardener. I guess what keeps me sane is going for a walk. I love walking in the hills, in the mountains, particularly Wales, the Lake District. Of course, some of you know that I live in Wales, and so at the moment I am in lockdown, which is really unfortunate, but just getting out. In fact, one of the things that we've been talking about is how to reorient a working day, because it's dark in the morning, it's dark in an evening, and actually getting out in the fresh air during the daytime and even just walking is really critical, and being quite disciplined in doing that. And I need to be a bit more disciplined in that, because otherwise you're sat, aren't you, all day looking at screens, and that is really not great for anybody's mental health. So yeah, I probably have a must do better, but I am trying hard.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, Moira. And I'll finish off by saying I don't have any of the challenges of Moira and Helen in terms of protecting my health and well-being, because I'm working on campus and I walk around the campus talking to our students, so that keeps me fit and well. No, joking aside, I do think it's really important that we all lead by example, and when I'm on campus, I do benefit from being able to walk around and see our students and our staff and talk to them. But I would add walking as my thing. Moira talked about gardening, Helen talked about walking. Perhaps you are detecting a generational shift in exercise patterns there. But you would be pleased to know that one of our SMT members, well, two of our SMT members, Mike Weed and Mark O'Keir, both run from Whitstable to Canterbury. So there we are, but I don't think I can claim that.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody involved in this, and as ever, I know it's a bit of a different setup, but for the students, and we really appreciate the time that you give to this. You've answered some really important questions, and I think they'll be happy with that. And moving forward, a personal thank you for working so closely with us, especially coming into the lockdown, the pandemic, and everything moving forward. So a massive thank you from all of us here. And this is going to be live as well. It is live on Facebook, but it's also going to stay on there as a video, so more people will see it, and it will be forever in the ether, Rama. So that's nice to know. But yeah, thank you everybody for watching. We really appreciate it. And if you do have any other comments or suggestions, feel free to email us. My email is becky@ccsu.co.uk, or you can just comment underneath on the Facebook post as well. Thank you so much, Rama. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Becky and colleagues. Thank you.